Hi, I'm Matt Painter. I'm the MD and CEO of KalGold. We are systematically exploring the greater Pinjin gold project in the east of the Eastern Goldfields in Western Australia. We've got really good reason to believe that the area has the potential to host significant major gold deposits. In this video, I'm going to describe the methodology that we're using, our approach that we will use to make sure that if such a deposit exists on our tenure, this will make sure that we find it. The Pinjin project is hosted by the Laverton Tectonic Zone. It's an ancient fault that seems to have been the conduit for gold mineralizing fluids over various times in the past. And this major structure weaves and moves around throughout the geology of the Eastern Goldfields. And in the north of the structure, it's host to some of the major deposits of the region, including Granny Smith, including Wallaby, including Sunrise Dam, and many other deposits. The Laverton Tectonic Zone has quite a distinct shape. In the north, where the large deposits are, it's quite wide and it trends north-south. Heading further south of Sunrise Dam, it swings around towards the southeast and becomes quite a bit narrower. However, north of the Pinjin Goldfield, it starts to swing back around to a north-south orientation again, and again, it broadens right out. In more recent times, discoveries by companies like Apollo Consolidated put together large resources out at Rebecca, and that's because they dared to look. And now that we have Ramelius Resources working the area, it's growing, it's getting larger. We contend that if we look throughout more of the area, we'll find more such deposits. One of the reasons we think that there's so much potential in the south still is partly based on history, partly based on the physical geography of the region. Historically, the Pinjin Goldfield was one of the last goldfields to be discovered at the end of the gold rush in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And by the time it was discovered, the gold rush has pretty well waned. There's not as much work out there historically by the prospectors as you might expect to see elsewhere. Another significant difference with this part of the world is the lack of outcrop. Yes, there's bits and pieces here and there, but by and large, the amount of outcrop in the area is minimal. And where there is outcrop, it's often quite poor quality. KalGold sees this as a massive advantage. The lack of outcrop means that historically it hasn't been looked at, but for us, we can get in there and check a number of targets, a whole series of targets that just have not been previously recognized and have not been previously tested. So I'll take you through our exploration strategy and the way that we operate in the area. Each step is a decision point where the target is assessed, and it can either be progressed or parked up or rejected. And we systematically step through and assess these targets, because until we actually physically sample them and see what's there, we're not going to have a really good idea as to what they might entail. Some may be mineralized, some may not be. Let's see. But yeah, we are going to drill and test these things and find out what's there. So the very first step that we use out here is target identification, and this has been an ongoing process for quite some time. We're very fortunate in as much as a lot of the area is covered by high quality, high resolution aeromagnetic data, but there's some patches that aren't, and that includes the Jungle Dam area, where we've just recently flown a new data set. We haven't received that back yet, it's still being processed. But acquiring that high level data, that high resolution data where we need it, is one of the steps that we take. And from there, we undertake a detailed magnetic interpretation. And in that, what we're looking for is features like structural complexity and geometries that may be amenable to gold mineralization. Do they correspond with areas that appear to have had their magnetization intensity decreased, for example? And we look at this in a really systematic way, based on ideas that we know from the regional geology and the regional picture, and identify targets through this means. And by doing that, we've actually got a whole series of targets throughout the entire project area and beyond in some places. And we pull that together After that, what we do is we start looking at the historic data sets, old drill data, old soil sampling, old outcrop patterns, and old outcrop geology. And we start to see how that all actually fits together. We get an idea of what the underlying geology might be, but magnetics is magnetics, it's not diagnostic. It doesn't always tell you what the rock is. But we start to identify some of these targets and prioritize them according to what we're seeing in the mag. And these are some of the targets that we're already starting to explore and assess in the southern part of the Pinjin project. First pass detection discovery is done largely through air core drilling, and in large part that's because it's such a cost-effective way to drill. It's inexpensive. On a per meter basis, it's the cheapest form of drilling, but it's limited with what it can do. It can only go so deep. We use quite widely spaced drill centers to start with, so it might be 400 meters between drill lines. It might be every 80, 100, 200 meters. So it's a very, very broad approach to start to see whether we have anything of interest worth following up. And this is the approach that we started off with at Wessex, where we initially found very, very good, thick intercepts. And those intercepts were quite unusual. They were typical intercept sort of grades, which you don't normally expect from air core. We're looking at dealing with values that might be 40 parts per billion or 0.04 grams per tonne or above. They're areas that start to get interesting. We also look at other elements, arsenic, for example, antimony, a bunch of other elements in there as well that may or may not be associated with gold mineralization, but can add to the story. And if we're seeing patterns that are consistent with the geology, consistent with the gold that we're aware of, then we can start to piece together that we might be dealing with something a little more significant. And this is what's happening at Wessex right now. So follow-up drilling is where we build upon our first pass results. And again, this is what we've just recently done at Wessex. So what we do, we'll tighten up the drill spacing if that's appropriate. We'll expand the drill footprint, which is what we did very successfully at Wessex. And we'll start to define areas that need to be tested by deeper RC drilling. So the air core drilling will only go so deep. We are interpreting a shallow easterly dip for part of Wessex. We think there's probably a steep component to that as well. But certainly those shallow easterly dip zones of mineralization were not actually accessible by the air core drilling in part. So there's areas that are open to the east, on the eastern side of the drill program, that we don't know whether the mineralization continues out there or is limited to the western zone as we know it is at the moment. So there's more work to do out there, but clearly with these higher grade zones of gold mineralization that we have at Wessex, they need further work, and they will be tested by RC drilling. The next step is the initial RC drill testing. RC drill targets generally are deeper. We want to start testing whether anomalism or mineralization that we see in air core results, whether that continues to depth or whether it's more extensive than we initially anticipated. We also find sometimes that in the weathering profile, there's more resistant units that preclude the air core drill rig going to the usual sorts of depths. These hard siliceous zones, for example, need to be drilled through, and that might have to be done with an RC rig. The complexity in the weathered profile can be enormous, and that's something that we learn about as we go. So it may be the case that the air core drilling that comes initially might give us a hint that there's something under there, but it's going to need RC test program to fully test those targets. The next step that we move on to is fleshing out the initial RC results. If we've had success from testing beneath an air core anomaly or air core mineralization, for example, and the initial RC drill program has shown that we've got primary mineralization in the subsurface, the next step is to start to flesh out and start to define the extent of this mineralization. How thick is it? How laterally extensive is it? How deep does it go, for example? And what orientations of gold mineralization are we dealing with? So this can involve several programs of RC drilling. Any such RC drill program will obviously be aimed to be consistent with any work that we would do down track that would lead to a resource. We plan that style of drilling to have a systematic spacing. We plan it to have measured downhole surveys so we know exactly where in space any of the intercepts will be. And as I mentioned, we will look at diamond drilling so that we get orientations on features and we can start to measure and follow those features and make the discoveries that we're after. The last part of the exploration success program involves defining a JORC resource, and if we've been successful with our RC drilling, we can start to use all this data in the construction of first JORC mineral resource estimate. And this is exactly what we've done at Kagella Gift and Providence. There we use historic data sets that we independently validated and fleshed out, and we augmented that historic data with our own drilling that improved vastly the understanding of the mineralization and its controls, and helped us to define its distributions, its orientation, and where it might extend to, and where it's open along strike and at depth. Any first resource will probably be focused on the shallow area to see if there's something that can be potentially mined by open pit. If it continues at depth, that would involve more advanced drilling that it could then be used for a second resource, for example. As we step through the discovery process, we anticipate that we'll be finding new mineralization as we go along, and we want to have a whole series of prospects and discoveries at all these points all along the discovery chain, so that we end up with a critical mass of gold mineralization, discoveries and resources ultimately out at Pinjin. So KalGold's approach is quite a classic approach to making gold discoveries. We're in an area where the amount of data existing over the project area is relatively minimal. And for us, that's really quite exciting because it means that historic explorers have just not had a go at this. We're going to be the first company and the first mover to test some of these targets, and some of these look incredibly interesting. This approach utilises KalGold's extensive expertise to swing the odds in our favour, and that's what it's all about here. We've made discoveries in the past using exactly this approach, and we want to do this again in the Pinjin area. It's high risk and it's high reward. There will be some targets where we'll drill it and they'll be a complete miss. There'll be some targets where we go, oh, hang on, there's something going on here. What is it? This is going to need more work, but some could be game changers. And in this neck of the woods, as I've described with the prospectivity of the Laverton tectonic zone, this is a real opportunity for us and a real possibility that we could grab the tiger by the tail and hit something significant. There's several candidate sites that look incredibly promising. Systematic testing based on their prospectivity and access is already underway. We are doing it right now, and that's what these current drill programs are all about. By using this systematic method, KalGold is giving us the best chance and the best opportunity to make a major discovery in the southern part of the Laverton tectonic zone. By following this method systematically, if there's a major gold deposit in the area, we will find it.